That concludes our public participation, and it takes us to item now, number 17, and that's for actions necessary or appropriate on matters discussed in executive session. And we have one item, item 3A, and do I have a motion? Ms. Hutchison.
I move that we approve the selected employment items as shown in Exhibit A.
And do we have a second? Ms. Hammond seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes unanimously. That takes us to item number 18, which is our second and final reading approval of the proposed revisions to Board Policy JICDA Code of Conduct shown in Exhibit C. Do I have a motion? Ms. Hutchison.
I move that we give second and final reading approval of proposed revisions to Board Policy JICDA Code of Conduct and Administrative Rule JICDA-R Code of Conduct, as shown in Exhibit C.
And we have a second. Ms. Baumgardner seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Passes unanimously. And that brings us to item number 19, which is our second and final reading of the proposed general fund budget for 2018-19, shown in Exhibit D. And before we have a motion, I'd like to ask Mr. Richardson to entertain questions. I know some of the board members had questions a little while ago, but that was actually a public hearing. So I would open it up now for any questions, and then we'll entertain motions after that, if that suits, if that's pleasure of the board. So, Ms. Hammond?
And this may be more, this may be Dr. Melton. In your presentation, it had mental, and I might have written it, I might not have written it down right. Was it mental health case managers, 100,000? Is that I am so concerned, especially as a teacher. I do know that mental health is also one of the keys to safety in our schools. I didn't know if that's a new position, and I wanted to see how it would work, and is it something we're adding? Because I certainly do support it, even support more of it if we can afford it. But I wanted to see how it was going to work and how it would be affected or implemented to children.
Absolutely. Let me do the introduction, and I'll ask Dr. Harris to weigh in on that because he's worked closely with the contracts for that. It is not an additional service, but we are looking to expand services. The budget we brought before you has gone through a variety of stakeholder involvements. We have heard loud and clear our parent leaders and our teachers echo that we need to focus on mental and physical health of our students and staff. So these things that we brought forward to you are to make sure that we offer emotional, mental support, emotional support to make sure that our students get the best of services that we can receive. So the $100,000 that you see there is actually under the leadership of Dr. Harris, working with coordination of Lexington and Richland counties to make sure we can provide additional services. Dr. Harris, anything you'd like to add to that?
I think that's well stated. It's an expansion of our efforts to try to provide those services to our students throughout the district, both Lexington and Richland counties.
And Mr. Gant, if I had, this kind of goes with it, but different, and these are my only two. I would like some clarification. I know that a real key, and it can too be connected to mental health, is behavioral problems within the classroom, and that's so important for teaching and learning. Did I write down, is that different, the behavioral specialist? Is that different than a behavioral interventionist? And if it is, I'd like to know, how we are, recommending that. And is it, that's not a new position, and what schools we do have it in?
Yes, ma'am. Those are different than what you may be accustomed to seeing in the past. You see expectation coaches, specifically in our Title I schools, our 6 elementary schools that have expectation coaches. These behavior interventionists are to make sure that we support the needs for professional development, but also the needs of students and teachers. So we have a student come into School District 5, and a teacher may need some support to make sure that child has one-on-one services, where the teacher may need to be observed and have some support and resources available to them. These people would be certified. They would make sure they offer professional development, but also individual services to support the team of teachers or the teacher itself. The current fiscal year that we've got our budget underway for the 17-18 school year, we were able to add one position like this, but this person serves the entire system. So having 23 schools, over 17,000 students, that's a lot to stretch one person towards. So these 3 FTEs would go towards making sure we match the need with the personnel that we will be hiring should the budget be approved tonight.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Ms. Baumgartner, I'm sorry.
Mr. Richardson, I noticed, and I'm going on my own kind of mental memory, so I noticed that the EFA funding is about 42 million, and if you add the tier 1, 2, and 3, it's roughly about 42 million. They're close to each other. Is that normal, or are we seeing a decline or something, that the funding is normally we get about the same much from the state in each?
It's just a coincidence this year that they're so close, I guess. I quite frankly, hadn't even caught that. But, the 3 tiers within the property tax relief, only tier 3 is the one that grows on an annual basis if we're lucky. This year, we're looking at it growing about $500,000, but over what we received the current year. The EFA, however, is based on a base student cost right now that just happens to be a coincidence that they're that close.
Okay. But that's not a trend or something that,
I would like for it to be an upward trend.
okay. Thank you.
I have a question, please.
Mr. Halterwanger.
Yes, I'd just like to go back to the mental health issue for a moment, please. With all the violence and all the incidents that we are seeing, that we see going on all across America, basically, where are we in terms of in terms of being, and I'll use the word adequate, in terms of meeting the needs of our students?
I appreciate the question. I'll start, and then Dr. Harris may have something he'd like to add. Needs are dynamic. They're going to change based on circumstances. They're going to change based on students and the family dynamics that a child may be experiencing within their home. We feel like with the process we have in place, we are district-wide, per Dr. Hefner's vision back in 2015 and 2010, before that with our advanced ed visits, to have initiatives go system-wide. So our PBIS, our positive behavior intervention, we have been in the midst of that for 7 years now, beginning our 8th year in the fall of 2018, 2019. With that, we have added triage services to make sure that we have teams in every school looking at identified needs of students, that teams come together that involve a school psychologist, social workers if necessary, school counselors, obviously the classroom teachers. So a variety of teachers and stakeholders around the table to look at the students' needs that they may have and then try to find the right services to match that student. Now, if you were to ask any of the 4 of us or any teacher that may be in the room, more is always more helpful. So what we're asking for you tonight is likely conservative. It's not to send a picture to this community that our students are out of control, but it is to let you all know that there are issues that we've identified, and we're trying to match the available resources with what we've identified as the needs that we can articulate to you. Dr. Harris may have more that he would like to add because he, of course, is directly involved with that supervision. Dr. Harris.
Thank you. I'll only offer this in addition to what we've already heard, is that obviously more is better. And we are on the right track as a district of moving forward with addressing the needs. We take to heart and we take to mind all of the issues that are socially related and that our students and our families are addressing. And one of the things that we try to do regularly with our mental health, in collaboration with our school psychologists and social workers and our nurses, quite frankly, as well, is to make certain that we are not only addressing the student, but it's a family-oriented approach. We want to make certain that the families are getting the services that they need to make certain that they are progressing as well, so that we can see the difference here in our classroom. So more is better, but we are on the right track, and I feel good about where we are. Certainly looking forward to an approval on tonight, hopefully, quite honestly, so that we can expand again what we're trying to do in terms of providing the necessary services. Trauma-related, trauma-induced kinds of incidents, as you made reference to, are impactful, and we do need to address them, and we are doing a pretty good job of doing that as we speak.
And Mr. Halterwanger, if I may add, when Dr. Harris had done the coordination with Lexington County and Richland County, the numbers we're projecting for you is what they have available resources for. So there is a limit as to what they can provide for us, but obviously we would prefer to have staff that we have directly at our accessibility that's certified and available to assist should they be needed in whatever situations may arise.
Thank you. I think, and I guess my question is, it's really a broader question, because that's only, what we're talking about is only a small part of the issue. We have a major issue in the world, in America, and the mental health part is a small part of this issue. And I think it needs to be something that parents need to understand, and everything just can't be laid at the school's doorstep. Is really my point. It becomes a team effort, becomes a community effort. And however, we of course need to do all we can do to meet the need of the students while they are with us. But it's a much broader issue than just that little small percentage of it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ms. Hutchison.
I wanted to ask Dr. Richardson if I just gave you promotion, but you know, you are that brilliant. You are brilliant. And I know in answering this question you will be. So I know it's very difficult to understand fund balance, and I think it's important each time we go through the budget to hear an explanation of what fund balance really is and the purpose for that, and then also how it impacts our bond ratings. And if you could give a little summary. And
Certainly. I guess the simplest way for me to explain it is, you know, when you hear a number thrown out as far as what our fund balance is, it's a snapshot taken on a certain date, June 30th of each year. What that is really, you hear people say it's a savings account, those kind of things. Really what it is operate. It allows us to operate through the year. You'll notice when we're presenting monthly financial statements early on in the fiscal year, late in the calendar year, you see our expenditures quite a few more dollars than what we're bringing in on a monthly basis. So that's what helps us to operate. We don't have to have to borrow money in order to operate when the revenue stream is slowing down until property taxes start coming in, property tax relief starts coming in. That, in essence, is what fund balance is. And obviously, the rating companies look at that to see if it's growing, or at least we're maintaining a certain percentage on an annual basis. So we try to stay within our board policy, which is anywhere from 15 to 18% of our general fund operating budget. So, and right now we have one of the highest bond ratings you can have for a school district, so obviously we're doing our job as far as that goes.
so when we have a high bond rating, that means that we get the very best interest rates.
That's correct.
And that means that we save a lot of money.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think that it's really important what you pointed out is that early in the fiscal year, when we don't have the revenue from the various sources, if we did not have the fund balance that we carefully plan for, then we might have to borrow money.
We would definitely have to.
And we definitely have to. And I believe that back during 2008, 2009, and some of those rough years following that, I believe there were some districts that had to borrow money because they did not have an adequate fund balance. So I wish we could think of another term other than fund balance, because I think it's very confusing. I think it's more like a conservative operating budget. I'm not quite sure, but knowing how conservative you are, and you treat this money like it's your own checkbook, which we are very grateful for, but this is not something that we are just frivolously trying to, pad. It's the way that we can make sure we cover our expenses, including our payroll.
Oh, that's the biggest part of our expenditures, obviously. So yes, that's correct. Now, do we sit I mean, we don't necessarily plan to grow our fund balance on an annual basis. But from my standpoint, and I think hopefully from your standpoint, you would rather me be a little bit more conservative on what I think we're going to bring in and be high on the expenditure side, because my goal is to make sure we're not finishing in the red on an annual basis. I think we would probably have a different conversation if that were happening. So, I mean, obviously, I want to make sure that we're finishing. I mean, it'd be great if we could nail it, but we don't. I mean, obviously, this is a fluid thing, but I want to make sure we're finishing in the black on an annual basis. So, yes, I don't see that as a bad thing when we grow our fund balance a little bit on an annual basis.
Well, it seems very prudent to me and very sensible. And the fact that we are at the very top of the bond ratings really does say something. So thank you for explaining that.
Sure.
Good question. Mr. Cates.
The presentation you gave tonight has our projected revenue, and that's projected because our friends at the State House hadn't settled up on what they're doing yet, I guess is the biggest reason that's projected, and we don't know yet local ad valorem taxes and other taxes. So I understand that's projected. How often does our projected revenue and our actual revenue, how close do those typically track?
Well, that can depend on a lot of things, but you know, majority of our funding from the state, obviously, is based upon our student enrollment and the different classifications and everything. So that, you know, as we grow, obviously, our revenue is going to grow. On the local basis, the taxes that we're bringing in, let me say this, it's a lot easier for me to project expenditures than it is revenue at this point in time. Because of some of the information that we get from we deal with two counties. I'll be honest with you, Richland County's a little slow on providing information to us, so it's a little bit harder for me to estimate what a value of a mill is going to be because we don't really have up-to-date information at this point in time. So it's a guess, but we've been close. I mean, when we were within 98 or 99% of what we budgeted, then I feel pretty good about it.
Good. Ms. Baumgardner.
Mr. Richardson, I also noticed that the safety officers are going from 190-day contracts to 240. And, you know, since school is not in session, what kind of need do you anticipate with the additional days?
And
we
Dr. Harris may want to answer this, but I will mention this. You know, we have programs that go on 12 months a year in this school district, summer camps, after-school programs, or I guess summer school programs, those kind of things. So there's something going on, athletics, always, there's something for them to do. There's not going to be a lack of it for anything to do.
And I thank Mr. Richardson for sharing that. That's precisely right. Along with after-school summer programs, we were looking to engage our staff in trainings, opportunities to understand what we need to do in case of event, emergency preparedness, rather. It's opportunity for planning opportunities for us as well. But the biggest thing is we've got a lot of movement. I think that's really the heart and soul of it, is that there's a lot of movement still during the 4 days or 5 days that we're here during the summer, wherein we want to be available and to make certain that we are providing the most safeguards that we possibly can for all of our staff and all of our campuses.
Now, do we have some corroboration between our safety officers and our social workers and people like that? Because so often what we're dealing with is potentials or, you know, sightings and things like that working together. You know, you may both together. How much interaction do we have, which I think would be very important?
Absolutely. All of those entities are the part of the Planning Administration Division, and I can tell you that there was a great expectation that there's collaboration among all of those entities. So I can say to you very affirmatively that there was a lot of communication and collaboration among our nurses, our safety officers, our social workers, our family educators, be it adult education, you can name it. There's a lot of that, and there's a great expectation that we do that, and we continue to do more of that because everything that happens with the student touches a lot of those areas. And in order for a district to serve the needs of our students and their families, as I mentioned earlier, then all of those entities got to work together. So we are doing that. I feel really good about that, and I feel really good about the addition of the safety officers this year, and looking forward to a continuation of great works that they're doing, as well as the other entities of that planning and administration area.
Thank you.
Mr. Richards, I want to go back to an area, and I appreciate the question from Ms. Hutchinson and Mr. Cates. Everybody's asked great questions regarding the budget, but we had a comment or two at public participation about the fund balance and its growth and so forth. But quite frankly, I want to take my hat off to you and your staff and our whole school staff for not operating in the red and having to guess at it at the end of the year. We all pick up the newspaper or read the clippings almost daily and see a school district or an entity that had needs, legitimate needs, but didn't follow their budget. Somehow it got outside the rim and of what they had to operate on. So I want to thank you all for keeping such a tight rein on it and doing great projections. I don't know how you project it as close as you do. And in my simple terms, when I think of a fund balance, I think about how all of us are generally paid. There's a certain time of month that your paycheck comes in. At that moment, it may look pretty inflated in your checking account, but you have obligations that you're committed to, a mortgage, a utility bill, something that you know you can't go out that day and commit that money to something else because you got these other bills coming. So that's sort of how I see it. I know a few years ago we had there are unplanned events all the time. We had a mold mitigation issue in the district. I don't even know the final total on that, but I know if we'd had a very low fund balance, we'd have been out on the bond market. If we'd had a low balance, borrowing money at a very high rate to take care of a issue that we had to take care of. So I appreciate it. It is the public, and I don't even know that I understand it fully, but I appreciate the position that we're in. So thank you. And I would say to that, one question, and then I have another couple of comments. If we had a catastrophe and we had a budget issue, I think we all see that we're not in a status like that. Our state's in a growth pattern. We're doing well. If we didn't get planned for funds, how long could we keep this district going? And I know that our personnel piece of this whole budget is probably 90% plus or in that range. How many months or how many weeks could we operate before that supposed fund balance deflated?
That's a question I don't know I know the answer to, but what I could tell you, if we were in a position like back in 2008, 2009, where massive cuts were coming, I don't know if we could survive without doing some cuts, but I think we would be in much better position to try to absorb it and give us a little bit of time to plan for them rather than having to react to them as they happen to us.
Right. And I will tell you that's exactly what happened in 2008 and 2009 in this district. We absorbed some cuts from the state that they couldn't help, we couldn't help, but we absorbed it and planned for it. I don't know what we'd have done without that reserve fund to do that at that time, or fund balance. The other thing I was going to tell you that you had a slide up that showed, I think it was number 13, and you were citing some of the differences between the Senate and the House version and some of the things they're going to try to compromise on. And one of the items that was there that is certainly worth us looking at, and this whole board has discussed that. We've done it in board officers meeting. We've all discussed it among ourselves. But there's an item in one of the budgets that calls for 1% increase for employees. And in this district, when we say employees, we're talking about professional employees and support employees. So everyone's covered. That's the way our philosophy has been. But in the other version, they're talking about a 2%. You showed us tonight is that 1% is partially funded. If the 2% came in, we don't know at this point if it's going to be partially funded or partially not funded. I assume that that's the status until they finalize and say where the money comes from. So I appreciate that being there, and I appreciate that being pointed out. Of course, we heard from our speakers tonight. Each speaker and each person that stood with a speaker recommended that we do something for employees above where we're planning to do. And I think this board maybe won't meet the total expectation of that, but I think we're maybe in a great position to do that, at least part of that. And we've already talked about the mental health piece that's been put in this budget. We've talked about the behavior interventionists, people who are trained to help us turn that around, and how that goes hand in hand. And that's part of the problem. Mr. Halterman was so right. It's a big societal issue that we are a big part of society. But I'm so proud that we planned, and we've listened to our parents, and we've listened to the tragedies across this country, and we've planned in our budget to try to take some action before a tragedy occurs. I was at a meeting that I know Mr. Cates was at, Dr. Hefner and most of the staff, several months ago after the incident in Florida, a few days after. We talked about the preparedness that we had and what they had in Florida. And from the parents came the thought, that is wonderful that we got that reaction plan. But what can we do on the front end? What can we do to maybe stop that from happening? So I think this budget proposal is an attempt to start a small piece of that. And I know that may grow, because that's a big part of what's going on in our society and in our schools. But I would commend you all for having that as a piece of this. But the thought on that item, that slide 13, what's our total budget? I know it's 187 million. Is the correct number if this board were to go forward and fund the 2% included in this budget, not knowing exactly if the state's going to fund it or we're going to fund it? Is that number 188,721,570?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So if we wanted to take that action, we could, the motion would have to reflect that number.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I just want to make sure we had that right. Well, that's all my speech making on this. I think it's a sound budget. I think it touches on things that we need, that our schools need, and we're going to need more of in the future. I think there's a cry always to cut the budget, do this, go back to the way it was 20 years ago. But we don't hear that cry that hard. The cry I hear from parents saying, I want my child to continue to get the quality education, be safe in our schools. I've not ever had one parent or grandparent or family member ever come to me, and I don't think this board has, to say, we want you to take those SROs out of the school. We want you to eliminate that 4K program. We could save money. Not one parent's ever told me that. So that's the phone call I don't get that I love. My parents are police. So that's kind of where I am on this right now. Ms. Hammond.
It kind of goes along with your speech. I was just interested in if we can do the 2%, I certainly support that. But I wanted to see if we could have a little history lesson for us. In one of the speakers, representing the teachers, had said it, and he's been in our district 17 years, and it's been 10 years since a substantial, across-the-board raise. And I think he mentioned 3%. I thought I would ask, because I don't know, what's the last, and I didn't know how we define substantial, but I was just interested, does it mean that would be 3%? But what's the most we've given in 1 year? I guess, Mr. Richardson, since you've been here, or any board members that have been here longer, like Mr. Gant, do you know the largest we've ever been able to give?
This is probably the largest since I've been here, 2%.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, that I thought maybe this was for me, but I didn't know if there was more history here.
I don't recall anything beyond a 2%.
So 2% is the most that we as a board have proposed in the last, say, 5 years?
As far as I recall, yes, ma'am. I do know the state, since 2008, has not given too many, they haven't given many cost of living adjustments anyway, but a substantial no. As I recall, maybe back in 2011, 2012 timeframe, they gave, I believe it was a 2%, and I think health insurance increases for the employee actually went up more than what they were getting for a raise, so their paychecks actually went down.
And Mr. Richardson, when we do like a raise, say the 2%, like Mr. Gant's talking about, that we hope we can do, that's over and above the step, correct?
That's correct.
So that's why it would be, let's say, a real 2% raise to the teacher that they are still within, going to be a step each year. I know they can be stepped out, and then it's no raise except this 2%.
That's correct.
Mr. Cates.
Mr. Richardson, on page 13 of the presentation, the 188, 721, 570, I just want to make sure I understand, that would include a 2% raise, the $500 bonus, and any step increases that may be due. That would all be covered in that number.
Yes, sir. What I tried to show you here, the 187, $342 million included all those items, and I wanted you to know what it would cost this district to include an additional 1% for all employees in the district, and that's the almost $1.4 million you see there.
And my final question, and thank you, that makes it clear. Earlier you mentioned the budget would have to be amended. I mean, that comes back to the board, and we see that. So that's, we will know when that time happens.
And I will tell you, I mean, assuming we have a state budget by the end of this fiscal year, I feel like we would be coming back this year. I feel stronger about it this year than I have in the past due to the fact that we're waiting so late, number one, to pass a budget. We really don't know what's going to happen. But I just want to let you know, if the budget were to pass as it currently stands, and, you know, if I have some more up-to-date numbers, obviously I'll update what we have here. But based on what I know right now, it will require a millage increase to fund this additional 1%. Don't know what that would be at this time because we just don't know what the state numbers are going to be yet.
Right. It may,
It may.
depending on what the state.
Correct.
Maybe if we take the right action and give the powers that be at the state to take the right action, we can lead the way for them one time, at least.
I like it.
But I possibly think we can. Mr. Halterman, do you have a motion that you want to make?
Yes, sir. I motion to approve the second and final reading of the 2018-2019 general fund budget in the amount of $188,721,570.
We have a second. Ms. Baumgartner, sorry. We have a second. Any further discussion? Ms. Hutchison and Ms. Hammond.
As I look at the recommended budget changes totaling 3%, which we've already talked about, the guidance counselors, the behavioral interventionists, et cetera, it reminds me about what we do, what a great job we do, and the administration recommends to us ways to help our students succeed and ways to keep our students safe. You can't just look at our budget each year and say, as some critics are misinformed and try to say, tie our student count to budget increases. We do a lot more than just operate in a classroom. The fact that this administration is recommending another math interventionist, I can't say that correctly, the mental health, and all these other wonderful ways to support our students helps explain, number one, why we have such top rankings in this school district, and number two, why people like to move to this school district. So, you know, I just commend the administration and staff and for continuing to look out for our students and being brave enough to come to the board and to the community to say, this is what we need. It's going to cost money, but this is what our students need. And I think that it's just a great, I'm proud to be part of this school district that does such a good job of taking care of our students and our teachers and staff.
Exactly. Thank you. Ms. Hammond?
I would like, this is a small amount, but I would like the board to consider a small amendment to our budget in relation to the fact that we reduced our board meetings from 19 to 16 meetings. I move that we reduce our board salaries by that same percentage as that we have reduced the meetings. It's not a large savings, but it's a small gesture that I think would be in good faith for teachers.
All right, so that's your motion?
Motion, I have
You'll be able
to.
to give that to Ms. Tyler. Let's see if we have, do we have a
I have a
second
second.
to this motion? Anyone second the motion?
Which one?
The one that Ms.,
Do I
this
still
was
give it to-
amendment to our original
To the
motion.
budget.
So the amendment fails for the lack of a second. It takes us back to the original motion, and we've had our discussion, our questions. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes unanimously. So thank you very much for all the comments, all the thought process that went into this. And that's going to bring us to our next item, but Dr. Hefner had pointed out to me that there was a reason, a very valid reason for one of the concerns that was given at public participation. I'm going to let him address that so that the record will reflect what the problem was with our website this past Friday.
Yes, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to do that. Our board packet is up. It's been up for, I think, all the time. We did have a huge problem system-wide Friday when our internet was cut near the, at the site where they're building the new Freddy's restaurant, and it took down the internet connectivity all across our district for the balance of the day and into the weekend. So depending on what time you may have tried to access our website, there may have been problems, and that would be the reason for it at that time. Since that time, it should be as accessible as always. Thank you.
Ms. Murphy, your public participation is over. We know, I think Ms. Goggins just showed you the website was up and running. Well, we're not going to debate your issue. The thing that I hope will happen is that that the Irmo News, who's covering this big story, will have it correct. So Al, we're depending on you to get this story right. We had a problem at Freddy's new hamburger restaurant. Not our problem, but we've addressed it. We're back online, and we're up and running. So we've had a vote. We've had an explanation. We're not debating from the floor. And we'll go to item number 20, which is our final, next to the final item, which is our second and final approval of the revisions of Board Policy BEDH, public participation at meetings. And I'm going to ask Mr. Cates if he'll lead us in this, because this is a board policy. We've had a lot of board discussion about it, a lot of board input. And Mr. Cates actually went to our Parents Advisory Cabinet and presented it to them about 2 weeks ago tomorrow and got some very valuable input. So Mr. Cates, if you'll lead us in this, and then we'll take action upon your
You want,
discussion.
I'll make a motion that we give second and final reading.
That'd be fine, and then we'll go back to you for an explanation. Okay. You want to make the motion? That's fine.
Yeah, I make the motion that we give second and final reading to Board Policy BEDH, public participation at meetings.
Okay, we have a second, Ms.
Second.
Hutchison, and that'll take us to discussion. I'm going to go back to Mr. Cates to lead us in this.
Yes, sir. I did have the opportunity to present the draft policy to the superintendent's parent advisory cabinet. And I appreciate the time. That is not a advisory cabinet for the board, but the superintendent, Dr. Hefner, was kind enough to give us time at that meeting. The parents were given the draft, or all the attendees were given the draft policy, presented some rationale behind the policy, and were asked to give us any feedback or concerns they had with the draft policy. The policy was overwhelmingly received favorably. There was little concern with the changes. The feedback was from that group was pretty much the amazement in which the district is so open and available to answer questions, and also to be reminded that this has to do with how questions that are answered in public participation are handled. And I never want to lose sight of the fact that there must be hundreds of questions asked every day and we field a lot of those individually, but that our teachers, the staff, the principals, the district's office, and I appreciate the way you respond and the way we keep the public informed. The policy really has made one or two, trying to make some clarifying statements. We want to make sure that we understand that This policy will not circumvent FOIA. We've been clear with that. We want participation from the public. We welcome participation from the public. The policy does not limit the ability for the public to participate at our meetings. There's no limit on the time allotted for the meeting, for the participation at the meeting. And I believe the questions that were raised in public participation in the last, I guess, 2 meetings concerning this policy have, on the whole, been answered with this particular draft of the policy. It still says questions are going to be answered. It does simplify that we're going to follow one time frame. There won't be multiple time frame. And we will have the ability to refer questions to people to questions that have already been asked and answered. And that we don't want our staff to spend time asking questions, having to answer questions that we know they can't answer concerning student records, concerning personnel records. Our staff is not in the position to interpret the will or the mind of the board. So I feel like the policy's addressed those concerns, and I would support the policy as it's drafted and presented for consideration tonight.
Any other comments? Ms. Hammond?
And I appreciate the hard work that Mr. Cates did, and he's been kind enough to speak with me several times on the phone about some of my concerns. One that I still feel we might need to have more clarity or a line drawn, because there's confusion, I think, with the public between the FOIA request and the difference in that with a public participation request. So, and I think, Mr. Cates, you feel like the way this is written, that it is very distinct between, you know, how it, like, say, let me show you where's the one I made my notes. Like under the blue part that says, questions asked during public participation will be given due consideration and care. Questions will be addressed as follows. And the number 1 says, question will be reviewed and answered in a timely manner following the FOIA timeline. I wasn't sure that all the public knows what the FOIA timeline is. I know they can go look that up, and then I know it could change because the state does that. But that was a little bit in the confusion for me, or might be for people. And it might be better had we put there for public participation questions not covered by FOIA. That may have been more clear for me. And then my other one, I think, that I talked about was where we talk about number 4, questions deemed inappropriate will not be answered. Factors that would make a question inappropriate include but are not limited to. We give like 3 examples, and I certainly agree with all of them, that they're not something we would want you to have to answer. But I worried a little bit about the perception that we have a lot of verbiage. We name 3, which is not all of them, but those 3 are like 3 examples. So I thought about that possibly bringing confusion. I do think it's better than the first time we had it, but those were 2 of my concerns, Mr. Cates, which I talked to you about on the phone. But I just want to be sure public has no confusion between which is which and how we handle both, and that we're not in any way, and we're not trying to discourage any type of public participation.
Do you want me to address those or just
Feel like
Yeah,
at
and
the
then-
pleasure?
Yeah, if you don't
Well,
mind addressing it.
I don't. I believe it's perfectly clear. We state clearly questions will be reviewed and answered in a timely manner following the FOIA timeline. The reason the timeline is not articulated there, we don't want to have to change the policy every time FOIA may change. So to say that we're going to follow the timeline gives us a reference point. There are not 2 different timelines where the public doesn't have to guess, well, is this going to be answered in this time frame or that time frame? Was that a FOIA question or was that the public participation? They're going to be answered in the same time frame. I think it's clear in point number 2 that to questions requiring document research, document production, or the redaction of information will be considered Freedom of Information requests and will be addressed through the district's FOIA process. I don't know how to be any clearer with that we are not avoiding any questions. We are just simply not circumventing FOIA on questions that should be handled through FOIA. As far as the examples in number 4, that's why it says include but are not limited to. It would be impossible to list all of the potential questions that could be deemed inappropriate. We don't want our staff time or resources spent responding to questions that we know they can't answer when it has to do with FERPA or with personnel matters, trying to interpret the action of the board. So I think those are fairly clear, and that's all I had to say on that.
Just one.
I think Mr. Haltwanger, then Ms. Bumgardner, come back.
Just a comment really to Mr. Cates and Mr. Goggins for doing what I think is a wonderful job on this and representing the board in rewriting this. And I think we've beaten this horse. I'm sorry, beaten this whatever, this rug. I don't want to use an animal. We've beaten it up pretty good because you mentioned you have 3 examples, and honestly, we could go find the greatest policy writer in America, if that's possible, and come here and write it up, rewrite it, and we still would have a problem. Somebody will have a problem. That's just human nature. And again, I think you guys have done a great job with it. Well satisfied with what you have here, and quite frankly, it's time to move on.
Ms. Bumgardner?
Well, I strongly agree with you, Mr. Haltwanger. I just have one, first of all, thank you, Mr. Cates. Wonderful job, very clear cut, and the
absolutely.
rewriting is great. I would just like to add I would like to add one more additional on the number 4, and because I see it frequently where people will ask questions with the wrong assumptions. They'll provide information, the old saying, are you still beating your wife? Well, there's no correct answer. Where the way the question is worded, there is, and we get those almost every week. And that would, I'm not sure how to word that, but that kind of thing, that one thing, because I see it so often.
You bring up the difficulty is where do you stop enumerating
Right.
those?
I realize that.
I felt like
because this is frequent.
yeah, I felt like C kind of covered that. That we're not going to deal with innuendo. We're not going to ask our staff, not our staff, the district staff, to deal with innuendo or try to read between the lines.
That word in there. I like the word innuendo. I think but beautiful job. Thank you.
And I want to give Ms. Goggins a chance to address this. At the end of the day, Mr. Cates, what he's done has been great work, but he's ready to turn it over to the professional that runs the office that fields these questions and spends a lot of time with it. So I know you all have worked very closely together on this, and so give us any inputs, any thoughts, any suggestions. And as we all know, we deal with policy since the day I set foot on this board. We deal with policy, we deal with laws that change and reflect. We have to reflect it in our policy. So we'll revisit this at some point because the law changed. But I think at this point, this is a good policy to go forward with. But I'll turn
I
it over
can
to you.
only speak as someone who spent the last 17 years in journalism or communications, and the plain way of saying this is that communications changes all the time. The way people want to receive information, the way they want to get it has changed tremendously in the last 10 years and the last year since this policy was touched. So I think it's right that we should revisit it. And I just add that the revisions Mr. Kate has led has touched on two matters important to my office in providing information to the public. One, misinformation is extremely harmful. So inappropriate questions, which we would have addressed and posted previously, gets out into the community and spreads misinformation. So the revisions help us avoid that and help us not harm the community with information that isn't, in fact, real information, but includes innuendo. And the second one is just accuracy. The timeline following FOI gives us the chance to really carefully look at these questions. And also what's missing now is when they are due by the next board meeting, the entire board does not get an opportunity to see those responses. So it now lets us craft that message, get it back to the board for discussion, and then present it. It helps us with accuracy. Those 2 points are important to any communicator. Misinformation and accuracy. And that's all I would have to add.
Thank you very much.
Just
Mr. Gates.
one clarifying statement. It is unusual for a board member to be this involved in drafting policy, and I just want to be clear, the only reason we took this approach, because this specifically is a board operations policy, and we were asking district staff to guess what we were wanting to do as a board, and it seemed to make more sense for us to articulate that back to them instead of them guessing. So I appreciate Mrs. Goggins and the fine work she's done on this. She's been very responsive and helpful, and I hope we have a model policy as we go forward.
Great. We have a motion, a second. We've had a great round of discussion. We thank you all for your work on it. Everybody's had input. At this time, we'll take a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Motion passes 5-1 with one abstention, one absent. And that brings us to item number 21. Well, before we get to 21, I want to thank Ashlyn Langley. Ashlyn, I noticed the students are dropping off because school's getting down to crunch time, but we appreciate, I want to thank you on behalf of the board.
This week.
Do what?
They have their awards this week.
That's true. You have a big awards night this coming Friday. You just had one this past Friday. We thought we had some invitations mixed up, but that's great. We appreciate you all and the students taking part in this. This is government in action, and it provides a living document to people that want to see what goes on at a board meeting. You've recorded it for posterity, I assume. So I'm sure they're getting a lot of hits on there, and people are interested in certain parts, and I love it that you can go and get the part you're interested in and move on. So thank you very much to you and your students. We do appreciate the effort it takes to do this. All right, we have a motion, a second. We get ready to we've taken the vote. Excuse me. We're down to adjourning.
Can I make a quick comment, please?
Yes, sir.
One quick comment before.
Oh, my gosh.
This coffee is picked me up, so I'm not really tired anymore.
Oh, my.
However,
We're still gonna adjourn.
this is serious. I do want to take this up. School is about over, I guess. Gets out on the 8th, and I just like to publicly say for the 4 of you and the 2 of you, I see your names there, but you know who you are, for the fine work that you've done this entire year.
Let's give them
I think I've sat here and watched you for a year, or actually for 3.5 years now, and you are remarkable people. I'm serious for a change. You're remarkable people, and you do a wonderful job, and we certainly do thank you for what you do. Thank you so much.
Well said, well said. All right, before his coffee kicks in again, we're going to vote on the motion to adjourn. We've had a motion and a second, haven't we? Oh, we did do a motion? Okay.
We hadn't done a
You're making a motion.
I move that we adjourn.
Okay, we need a second. Mr. Halterman, a second. Thank you. Now, no discussion. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Let's all go home and enjoy our families. How about that?